Good evening, Scotland. Good evening, social media land. I hope you are well. We go to the polls on the 5th of May and there is some confusion regarding the vote until you boke or just voting for one party while we use the single transferable vote system. I think it's important that we address some exceptionally pertinent issues regarding giving a preference to every candidate. From reading articles, watching videos and going on personal experience for every time we've used the STV as a voting method, I would like to explain my understanding of how it all works. I'm specifically going to use my own ward as the voting example, which has 3 seats and 7 candidates, 2 Indy, 4 Union and a Scottish Libertarian, which is Indy-ish but not aligned with my personal values. Okay, it's May the 5th and we have voted and the polls have closed. All the ballots have been counted and are set out on piles for each of the candidates with their first votes at the top. The SNP candidate easily reaches the quota when counting up all the first votes and has plenty to spare, surpassing the quota. All the votes counted after the quota are now transferred to the second preference on those ballot papers. None of the candidates reach the quota yet, so the candidate with the lowest amount of votes, let's say the Scottish Libertarian, is eliminated, and the second preference on those ballots are now transferred to the appropriate candidates. This leads to the Green candidate reaching the quota and gaining a seat. Any of the votes carried past the quota for the Green candidate now moves to the next preference on those ballot papers. So here's my problem. Let's say my vote is one of those carried past the quota, and let's say I voted for every candidate giving them the following preferences: SNP 1, Green 2, Scottish Libertarian 3, Labour 4, Lib Dem 5, Scottish Family Party, who are they, and Tory 7. It would now mean that my vote would transfer to the next choice on my ballot paper, which in this case is the Scottish Libertarian. But they were the party with the lowest votes previously, so my vote is now transferred to the next preference on my ballot paper, which is the Labour Party. I don't want my vote to be transferred to a party I do not believe in. All this guff being said about voting for union parties at lower preferences, stating it shows you don't want them in, is wrong. Your vote could be counted by means of the single transferable voting system and could end up being placed to benefit a party you truly do not want to see in power. What makes this worse is you will never know where your vote is actually counted if you do this. I intend to vote only for the SNP and Greens. If there was an Alaba candidate or an independent candidates that were pro-Indy, then they would have my preference on the ballot paper too. But there is not, and I will not take the chance in my ward for my vote being transferred to a unionist candidate. Now, consider this. All the union voting public will not be marking preferences that are pro-independence, will they? Let me say that again. The union voting public will not be marking a preference that is pro-Indy. That means they will avoid SNP and Greens and any other pro-Indy element on their ballot paper for the exact reason I have stated. If you can find me, show me anything factual that is not conjecture that explains that marking preferences on your ballot paper for parties that you don't want to have a seat will show that you don't want them on your council and will not have a chance of being transferred and counted towards them, then please send me those details. But understand clearly that if you mark a preference for a party that you would boke for, that it could easily be transferred to them in their favour rather than you showing your distaste for them. That is just something to think about when you're at the polling station. Thank you for listening. Good night and good luck.
You're about to vote at the council elections in Scotland. But might things be slightly different to what you expect? In this election, the voting system used is called single transferable vote. Here's the lowdown. Each council in Scotland is divided into smaller areas called wards. Depending on the ward you live in, you will be voting to elect anywhere between 1 and 5 councillors. You may already know that you need to number the candidates on your ballot paper in order of your choice. But do you know how the votes are counted and how people get elected? To be elected under this voting system, a candidate must reach a set amount of votes, known as the quota. So what is the quota? The quota is calculated by dividing the total number of valid votes cast by the number of seats to be elected plus 1 seat. A 1 is then added to that result. For example, with 500 ballot papers and 4 seats to be filled, the quota would be 101. The votes are counted in stages. Stage 1. Only first preferences are counted. Anyone who reaches the quota is elected. Stage 2. Any votes received for a candidate above the quota are transferred to the next choice on each of those ballot papers. If no candidate has enough votes to reach the quota, the candidate with the lowest number of votes is eliminated. Stage 3. All of their votes are passed to the next preference on those ballot papers. This process is repeated until all seats up for election have been filled and your councillors have been elected. Got it? Great work!